The absolute worst thing my narcissistic mother ever did to me was the way she spoke to me, especially the cruel, venomous words she would use. Last year, after my father passed away, everything seemed to spiral out of control. I had always known my mother was fragile, but the death of my father left her vulnerable in ways I could never have imagined. It was as if her world shattered, and she was clinging to whatever she could to keep from drowning in her grief. But instead of reaching out for comfort, she turned her pain and frustration on me, with an intensity that I had never experienced before. It happened on one particularly awful day. I had asked a relative to give my mother a ride to her doctor's appointment, a simple, thoughtful request, just trying to make her life a little easier. But instead of gratitude, I was met with an explosion of rage. She snapped at me for the smallest thing, her anger building with every word she spoke. And then, just as I thought it was over, she unloaded everything she had been bottling up for years, all the hatred and disdain she had for me. She began listing every single thing I had ever done wrong in her eyes. I can still hear her voice echoing in my head, her words searing into my soul. "You picked the wrong husband," she spat, as though the man I married was somehow a direct reflection of her failure to mold me into the person she wanted me to be. "You have financial problems. You're weak. You're not strong enough for anything." Each insult was like a slap, each accusation cutting deeper into my self-worth. And then, the cruelest words of all, "You're a horrible daughter." But the worst was yet to come. In the middle of her tirade, she looked at me with that cold, heartless glare and said, "I hope your daughter hurts you one day, so you'll know how it feels. Maybe then you'll understand how it feels to be truly hurt." I could barely process what I had just heard. To wish such pain upon me, especially in a moment where I was already reeling from the loss of my father, was beyond anything I could comprehend. And it didn't stop there. My mother's cruelty didn't even spare my own child. One morning, my daughter, still half asleep and groggy from just waking up, didn't say good morning to her. I could see the confusion in my daughter's eyes as my mother exploded in anger over something so trivial. It was as if she was looking for any excuse to lash out, and she found it in my daughter's sleepy, innocent moment. I couldn't just stand there and watch my child be tormented like that, so I stepped in, defending my daughter, trying to shield her from my mother's verbal assault. It's hard to explain the kind of emotional devastation that comes from having a mother who is supposed to be your protector, yet instead is the one who breaks you down with her words. The abuse I endure from her is almost entirely verbal, but it's just as damaging as any physical wound. The emotional scars she's left on me are deep, and they never seem to fade. Every insult, every cruel comment lingers, echoing in my mind long after the words are spoken. Update. I've been sitting on this update for a while, unsure of how much to share, but I've realized that writing it out might help me process everything better. Things have been really tough lately, and the emotional toll has been overwhelming, but I'm doing my best to keep going. After my last post, I thought maybe things would calm down. My mom had gone through a period of guilt after what happened with my daughter, but I should have known better than to think that would last. It didn't. If anything, the emotional manipulation has only gotten worse. For context, things with my mom are still extremely strained. I've tried setting boundaries, I really have, but every time I do, she finds some way to cross them. It's like she can't stand the idea that I'm no longer completely under her control. I've stopped letting her dictate how I live my life, but now it feels like she's determined to make me regret it. A couple of weeks ago, she called me, almost in tears, begging me to come over to help with some small task, something I knew she could easily do herself. She's been isolating herself more and more since Dad died, and I get it, I really do. But the guilt-tripping that comes with it is unbearable. She always makes it sound like if I don't show up, I'm abandoning her. But when I do go over, it's the same old story. It's never just about the task at hand, it's about all the things she believes I've done wrong. I try to explain that I have my own family to take care of, that I can't be there every time she wants something, but that just triggers another wave of anger. She started comparing me to other people in the family, saying how well so-and-so takes care of her, or how such and such never gives her any trouble. It's all a tactic to make me feel inadequate, like I'm not good enough, not as loving, not as selfless as others. I can't help but wonder if she's trying to turn me into the villain in her story, so she can play the poor, mistreated widow. It's exhausting. And as much as I try to keep my distance, there are still moments where I feel that horrible pressure, like I'm trapped between guilt and the desperate need to protect myself. My daughter has started asking me more questions I'm not ready to answer. She's noticed how Grandma treats me, and she doesn't understand it. She's only 8, but she's starting to pick up on the tension, and it breaks my heart that I can't shield her from it completely. There was one day, a couple of weeks ago, when my mom called and started in on me, yet again. I was already drained from a busy workday and feeling completely overwhelmed. But when she told me I wasn't being a good enough daughter and that I was failing her, I snapped. I told her, calmly but firmly, that I would no longer tolerate her belittling me, and that if she couldn't respect my boundaries, I wouldn't continue to engage in conversations with her. Of course, she didn't take it well. She started crying, accusing me of being heartless, selfish, and ungrateful. The usual. But this time, I held my ground. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I'm still not sure if I made the right choice, but I couldn't keep letting her guilt me into submission. The last thing she said to me before hanging up was a harsh, "You'll regret this." So, that's where I am now. I've still been seeing her, but I've been much more careful about when and how. The emotional exhaustion is still very real, but I'm learning to put myself and my immediate family first. It's hard, and I still feel so conflicted, but I'm slowly starting to realize that protecting myself doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me human. Thanks again for all the support and kind words from my last post. I know it's a long road ahead, but at least I'm starting to see it's okay to put my own well-being first. I'll update again when I can. Final update. I've been avoiding writing this update for a while, but after a lot of reflection and some significant changes, I think it's finally time to share where I am now. I won't lie, it hasn't been an easy journey, but I feel like I've come to a place where I can finally breathe a little. After my last post, things with my mom continued to be incredibly difficult, and honestly, they got worse before they got better. The emotional abuse was relentless, and it felt like every time I thought I had a grip on my boundaries, she would find a way to tear them down. The guilt-tripping, the manipulation, the constant criticism, it was wearing me down in ways I never expected. I kept thinking I could be the bigger person, that I could weather the storm and eventually things would smooth over. But that never happened. Instead, I found myself sinking deeper into the same toxic cycle. I reached a breaking point about 2 months ago. My mom called me one evening, and I could hear in her voice that she was about to start another one of her tirades. I don't even remember what the trigger was this time, probably something small like a missed call or a forgotten errand. But she began attacking me again, and this time something in me just snapped. I'd been holding on to the hope that somehow she would change, but I realized that I was the one who needed to change. I couldn't keep subjecting myself to this abuse, no matter how much she tried to make me feel like I owed her everything. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I cut ties. I told her that I couldn't continue a relationship with her if she was going to keep treating me the way she had been. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said it. I told her that I was done with the verbal abuse and the manipulation, and that if she ever wanted to have a healthy relationship with me, she'd have to make some serious changes. She didn't take it well, of course. The phone call ended with her accusing me of being selfish, of abandoning her when she needed me the most. But this time, I didn't let her words break me. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my chest. The first few weeks were hard. There were moments when I questioned if I'd done the right thing, moments when I felt a pang of guilt creep in. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered how suffocating the relationship had become, and I knew I couldn't go back to that place. I've spent these past few months focusing on my own healing and rebuilding the relationship with my daughter. The difference in how I feel now compared to how I felt a year ago is night and day. I've been learning to put myself first, to protect my own emotional well-being, and to say no when I need to. I've even been seeing a therapist, which has helped me work through some of the deep-rooted trauma that came from years of emotional abuse. I know that cutting ties with my mom was a huge decision, and I still have moments of sadness over it. There's a part of me that wishes she could have been the mother I always needed her to be, but the reality is that she never will be. She's made her choices, and I've had to make mine. I'm not saying everything is perfect now. There are still days when I feel the weight of her absence, when I wish things could be different. But I've realized that sometimes love isn't about staying in a relationship just because it's what society expects or because you're afraid of what people will think. Sometimes love means walking away to save yourself. I don't know if my mom will ever change, and at this point, I'm not sure it matters. I've learned that I don't need her approval to be a good person or a good mother. And while I'll always have that lingering sadness of what could have been, I know I'm doing what's best for me and for my family. Thank you to everyone who supported me throughout this journey. Your words help me more than you'll ever know. It's not an easy road, but I'm finally starting to feel like I'm on the other side of it. This will be my final update. I'm moving forward, and I'm ready to embrace a future where I can live without the constant fear of emotional destruction. I'm taking my power back, and that's a gift I'll never regret. Thank you again.